What's up, Calipers? Welcome back to the California Perspective. I'm your host, Callie. Yesterday, I was in the middle of editing the video on the Trump-Raffensperger phone call when the Trump rioters stormed the Capitol building, perhaps for only the second time in American history, the last time being in 1814 during the War of 1812. So I had to put that on the back burner because we got to get into this. So a lot happened Wednesday into Thursday morning. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris had their Electoral College victory cemented by the Congress, 306 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 282, in what he characterizes as a landslide.
We had a tremendous landslide Electoral College victory, like people haven't seen in a long time.
Not only did we win the election, we had an Electoral College landslide. Okay, it was a landslide.
We had an Electoral College, as you know, Congressman, we had a landslide. 306 to 223. We had a landslide. They lost an election and they lost it big. It was really a landslide from the Electoral College standpoint.
He only got upset about it after the results were very conclusive, 306 to 223.
And then it got bigger and bigger and wilder and wilder. And then we won by a lot. Don't forget, it was 306 to 223. That's a lot.
We had a massive landslide victory, as you know, in the Electoral College.
This was an excuse for the Democrats who lost an election, who actually got their ass kicked. 306 to 223. That's a pretty good shellacking.
Or at least when it happened to him. But the big news that overshadowed the vote counting was radical right-wing Trump-supporting terrorists stormed the Capitol building during the joint session of Congress, forced the emergency evacuation of all of the elected officials, it delayed the vote, and it showed the character of those who support Donald Trump, as Donald Trump himself showed his true colors in showing praise to the rioters and refusing to act to defend our nation's democracy, Capitol building, lawmakers, and the rule of law. In the lead-up to the protests, Trump administration refused to send the National Guard. During the right-wing insurrection, the governor of Virginia was asked and accepted the request for the Virginia National Guard and their state troopers to be sent to help support the Capitol Police hours after invasion. The moves by the right-wing terrorists should not come as a surprise. Just as last December, we saw right-wing protesters storming the Oregon State Capitol. In Washington, where I am, people pushed through the gate of the governor's residence in Olympia after protesting at their capital. We know right-wing rioters are violent, so why are we surprised and pretending this came out of nowhere? Domestic terrorist Ashley Babbitt of San Diego was shot and killed by law enforcement while storming the U.S. Capitol building. She tweeted earlier in the day, "The storm is coming, and we will not be stopped." The Trump supporter, 14-year veteran of the U.S. military, COVID-19 denier, was warned multiple times by law enforcement to try not to breach the barrier that had been erected inside the Capitol building. When she refused to comply and she continued forward, she was shot by law enforcement. So this poses an interesting question. The felony murder rule is a common law legal principle, now usually codified by statute, that allows prosecutors to charge defendants with murder, even when a victim dies accidentally. If a person dies during the commission of a dangerous felony, then their death can be deemed felony murder in some circumstances. Essentially, this rule is a way of officially declaring a victim's blood be on the hands of a criminal who indirectly caused their death. So since she died while the whole group of terrorists were inside the building committing a felony, this could place everybody that stormed the Capitol building as a possible defendant in a murder trial. Trump's security responsibility. Some are calling for invoking the 25th Amendment, which is more intended to transfer power from the president in the event of incapacitation, usually medical. Some are calling for impeachment and removal. Now, you might think this hyperbole, and we've been here before, but based on Trump's actions and forced inactions, we cannot dismiss this out of hand. The first issue is that the Trump administration refused to have the National Guard launched, which left the Capitol Police without enough support. To prepare for planning meetings ahead of time, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security are supposed to disseminate security bulletins. These were never released. Federal agencies are supposed to arrange conference calls with the principal groups involved in coordinating such large gatherings. This didn't happen either. And also, regional federal authorities should have been leading the planning process across agencies, which didn't happen. We know this is part of their standard planning process in that it happened before, when they prepared for the Black Lives Matter protests. The National Guard was out in a show of force to prevent any potential for disruption, and that was during normal congressional sessions. We know that the Trump administration is not afraid to use force against peaceful protesters, as we saw when he cleared the Lafayette Square last summer so he could get his photo op. Trump views the current invaders of our democracy as being on his team, so he refused to send out the National Guard, even while the mayhem ensued. Eventually, it was the governor of Virginia who mobilized the National Guard and state troopers to assist. Because of this, perhaps intentional shortfall, there were not enough Capitol Police support or even barricade. Even while the invasion was happening, Trump still did not quickly mobilize the National Guard. He sent out a now deleted video via Twitter. In the video, it said it's time to go home, but more importantly, to his state of mind, he said, "We love you." So even while the rioters were destroying the sanctity of our democracy and our democratic institutions, he was still heaping praise for his supporters. Last June, federal agents from the DOJ and DHS were preemptively deployed across the city to guard national monuments and memorials, federal buildings, and the White House as thousands protested with Black Lives Matter. Federal forces used tear gas to disperse peaceful protesters so that Trump could walk through nearby park for a photo op at St. John's Episcopal Church. So this stands in stark contrast to the lack of preparations the Trump administration prepared for Wednesday's events. And let's not forget Trump's incitement of not only the whole issue, but of the crowd, specifically on Wednesday morning. If impeachment is going to proceed, we have less than 2 weeks to do it, and impeachment must be done before he can pardon all the people responsible for this mayhem. Trump's battle of words leading up to the riot. Trump's embrace of right-wing terrorism is not new. While right-wing extremists are storming state capitol buildings in protest, and the FBI was warning against the biggest threats were from right-wing groups, Trump was providing legitimacy and attacking Antifa and Black Lives Matter as the real threats. We should all be aware of Trump's responsibility in fueling the flames of right-wing lies, conspiracies, a divorce from the facts, and the complicity of all that have served him from the beginning of his presidency. From a belief in alternative facts, to name-calling of other elected officials, to his embrace of dictators around the world, Trump's degradation of American democracy has been supported by his allies in Congress who choose short-term political gain over long-term well-being of our nation. Trump is the worst president of modern times, and, with his mishandling of the coronavirus leading to the death of more than 350,000 people in the United States, arguably our worst president in history. On the morning of the riot, Trump and Rudy Giuliani worked to incite the crowd to march to the Capitol building, calling for winning through strength and never backing down. Not only did Trump not prepare the Capitol for the event, he sent his people to the Capitol building. Not only did Trump not prepare the Capitol building for so many people, not only did Trump not prepare the Capitol building for such an assault, but he instructed his followers to go there. Capitol Police. Some of the Capitol Police were brave, barricading the door and standing their ground, guns drawn, to protect our elected officials. We know that Capitol Police have no qualms with using brute force and arresting protesters, as they have been willing to arrest handicapped protesters or the clearing of Lafayette Square, where Trump called in federal police to tear gas the innocent, peaceful protesters, or the many arrests the Capitol Police have done, or the 14,000 BLM protesters that have been arrested this past year. Compare that to the display yesterday, where we witnessed a Capitol Police officer holding the hand of a right-wing terrorist woman so that she may walk down the stairs safer. Here, we are able to see the ways that Black Lives Matter protesters are treated differently than right-wing terrorists, and not in the way that one would expect. Some members of the Capitol Police appear to have been complicit, opening the gates, encouraging protesters to get closer, allowing these same gates to be used later by protesters to break down blocked doors. Images and videos show some Capitol Police taking selfies with those who trespassed broke windows, and stole from the Capitol building. The right wing has been trying to spread the lie that both sides are responsible for the breakdown of decorum and civility. I have been made aware by conservative viewers that protesters occupied a Senate office during the Kavanaugh appointment hearings, trying to pretend it was the same. Here are some key differences. They didn't break through police lines to get in. They didn't interrupt the act of governance. Their presence did not require emergency evacuation of the building, and certainly not emergency evacuation of any of our elected representatives. So these acts are not the same, and white supremacist sympathizers are trying to play they did it too when the actions were very different. Moving forward does not mean that it is helpful to say both sides do it. Democrats have not spent the last 4 years contesting Trump's legitimacy at the ballot box. Hillary Clinton conceded to Donald Trump the day after the 2016 election. In this past 2020 election, Republicans picked up many House seats that they had lost in 2018. In fact, some of the same representatives who won those elections are the ones crying foul on the other side of the ballot. So their argument seems to be that only votes cast by Democrats don't count. This shows that Republicans truly see themselves as the only voices that matter. Any voice that votes against them is in some way illegitimate. Or perhaps they think it should only be worth 2/3 of a vote. We know that large marches are not inherently dangerous. The Women's March in January 2017 had an estimated 480,000 people, and it was conducted peacefully. You cannot just say that just because there are a large number of attendees, things are bound to get out of hand. This is obviously not true. It only got out of hand because the Trump terrorists wanted it to get out of hand. This also has to do with tactics that DC police can use. In previous marches, DC security required demonstrators to march in circles, requiring them to keep moving and telling them not to stand there during their protest. And all of this comes as Georgia has accomplished something historical, whose history has now been marred by the Trump terrorists. Georgia has accomplished the historical feat of electing only the 11th black senator in the history of the United States, the 3rd black senator in the Senate currently, and the 1st black senator from Georgia ever. I would like to congratulate Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff as 2 Democratic senators from Georgia who now have the opportunity to really impact a change in Senate leadership. For the California Perspective, I'm Callie. I'd like to thank you for sticking with us, making it this far in the video. I know this topic is hot on our minds. Hopefully we'll have more information coming as the days and weeks progress. It is time to get Trump out of office. The voters said so. Congress has confirmed the vote of the people. It's time to move forward.